What should we know about heavy metals? How do we test for them, and how do we avoid them?
Yeah, so heavy metals is sort of something that's become relatively important in the industry and relatively new, something that we weren't really talking about. People were sort of indiscriminately using organic amendments, and then states started testing for heavy metals, and we found that there's certain things that are going to be higher in arsenic, cadmium, lead, some of those major ones that are concerns. So, first of all, I want to say this. So, no one is testing our vegetables right now for heavy metals. And that to me is much more of an issue than what they are doing in testing in terms of our industry on the medicinal side. The other day I was at the grocery store buying tomatoes, and I was thinking about it. I was like, do I want to buy that hydroponically grown tomato in California that was grown using chemical nutrients, but probably not a lot of pesticides in a hothouse? Or do I want to buy that certified organic tomato that was grown in Mexico that probably has laxer standards and no one's testing for heavy metals? So while it may have been grown organically, it may be higher in arsenic or lead or cadmium than I want too. So it got me thinking about it's a complicated issue, I guess, is what I want to say around that. But in terms of how we manage it in soils, I want to say, first of all, we're passing in every state. We did just have a fail in Massachusetts, and then I just heard back from the grower today that the pH down was their biggest contributor of heavy metals. But every organic soil is going to have some level of heavy metals. Every organic fertilizer is going to have some level of heavy metals. And so it all becomes down to management. If we know how much the plant is taking out, and a lot of medicinal plants are hyper accumulators of these heavy metals. They're really, really good. Like hemp is used in remediating a lot of damaged soils because it's so great at pulling out heavy metals and other toxins out of the soil. So there's a few things we can do. We can pull heavy metals out by planting a crop that's going to essentially accumulate these nutrients and then getting rid of that biomass, all that leaf matter, everything like that. Also, your stems and your leaves are going to have higher levels of heavy metals than your bud or flower. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of how you trim your plant for testing. Let's see, what are some other things to think about here? So running a higher pH is going to help with certain heavy metals in them being less available to plants than others. So that will work too. But really, you need the amount that the plant's taking out of the soil needs to be less than the regulatory standard, but higher than what you're adding to the soil every cycle. And I know that's a little hard to visualize, but you just have to think about your inputs have to be bringing in less heavy metals than the plant is taking out. And as long as you maintain that, you'll continue to pass. But we're talking about parts per million, or in some cases parts per billion. So it is something you have to be aware of. And there's no formula to say, okay, if this soil has 10 ppm of arsenic, then my plant's going to fail for heavy metals. Because how you water, if you're using CO2, what your light levels are, what your VPD is, are all going to be factors in terms of how much heavy metals that plant takes up, in addition to pH and other things. So unfortunately, there's no exact science to this. There's no great way to know, but we can reduce heavy metals by utilizing products that are lower in heavy metals, and working with who makes your fertilizer to know that what your product is going to be safe. And like I said, there's some products out there right now that I see on the market that are very, very popular that are higher in heavy metals than people realize based on the independent testing we've done. And one good option for people if they want to test themselves, there's a lab called the Delta Urban Soils Lab. I think they charge like $15 a sample. It's not going to be as accurate as some of these other methodologies for testing heavy metals, but it's an affordable way to get a test of your garden without breaking the bank. And they can also test fertilizers too. So we've been using them just because of the price point. If I just sent in a sample to get certified for a new bloom fertilizer that we're going to be releasing, and I think it was like $250 to get the heavy metal analysis on it, to get a certified analysis that I can then send to the state to register my product properly. So yeah, it can be expensive too.
Is heavy metals more of a concern with some organic amendments than others? For example, like a rock phosphate, is there more likely to have heavy metals in there versus like an alfalfa meal or a kelp meal and so on and so forth?
Yes, though there's no hard and fast rule. So in general, rock phosphates, so soft rock phosphate, people have heard of Calphos, Eden makes a rock phosphate. There's a bunch of them. They're all mined products. Anything mined has the potential to have heavy metals in it. And so yes, I think in general, really watch rock phosphates. Kelp meal is another one that we see a fair bit of variability on. And you mentioned alfalfa meal, and that's a great example here because people think that like all alfalfa meals are going to be the same, but really is the soil that alfalfa meal was grown in high in heavy metals. If it was, then that alfalfa meal is going to be higher in heavy metals. But without testing of that particular source, you're not really going to know. And again, alfalfa meal is a tough one because it may be sourced from a variety of different places under the same brand name every year. So that's where testing kind of becomes more important.
So it sounds like whatever source you're going to buy that alfalfa meal, kelp meal, or whatever, looking for them doing that testing, looking at that report and seeing if there are heavy metals on there. But also it sounds like doing your own individual testing because sometimes those tests aren't going to be accurate to what the testing that you do on your own. So, wow, that's kind of crazy to hear.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's just something that unfortunately is more complicated than we want it to be.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.